My name is Amelia. I am 34 years old, and the first truth you need to know is this. My parents gave me away when I was only 8 because I was born a girl. That is not a metaphor, not a dramatic exaggeration. It is the cruelest fact of my childhood. While most children at that age were learning how to ride a bike or practicing multiplication tables, I was packing one small suitcase that carried the scraps of my life. One stuffed bear, a few books, a photo where I still believed I was wanted. The betrayal left a scar so deep that for years I believed I was disposable like an old toy set out on the curb. My father, Henry, believed sons were investments while daughters were costs, and my mother, Diane, followed his lead in silence. That day, when the agency door closed behind me and their car drove away without even slowing, something inside me hardened. I realized love in my family had never been unconditional. It had always been a transaction. But life has its brutal symmetry. The same abandonment that nearly destroyed me also opened the path to someone who would choose me, James Wilson. The man who became my adoptive father taught me that family is not blood, it is choice, sacrifice, and love. Years later, when James passed away, he left me everything he had built, $27 million, and a legacy of compassion. That inheritance was not just money. It was proof that one person's choice to love can erase a lifetime of rejection. When news of his will became public, the ink was still drying when Henry, my biological father, who had once signed papers to be rid of me, appeared on my doorstep. He called me by a name I had not used in over 2 decades, as if he could rewind time. He wanted something. And for the first time in my life, I had the power to say no. This story is not only about money or betrayal. It is about the weight of rejection, the miracle of being chosen, and the courage it takes to redefine what family truly means. As I tell it, I want you to stay with me because every turn matters. The silent birthdays, the empty promises, the night James sat outside my door while I shook from nightmares. All of it leads to a confrontation that would test the strength I had built from ashes. So if you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, if you have ever wondered why blood ties can cut deeper than they connect, then this story is for you. And maybe by the end you will see what I learned, that the family who saves you might not share your DNA, but they will share your soul. Now, when you hear that a child was abandoned, you probably imagine an orphaned baby too young to remember. But I remember everything. I remember the scent of pancakes my mother cooked the morning they drove me to the agency, as if a sweet breakfast could erase what was coming. I remember the way my father checked his watch, impatient to complete the errand of discarding me. And I remember the silence of the ride, broken only by the sound of my suitcase zipper trembling in the back seat. Those memories branded me. For years afterward, I built walls so high that no one could reach me. I refused to believe in the concept of family. How could I? Blood had betrayed me. Trust had betrayed me. Even love, that fragile promise whispered in bedtime lullabies, had betrayed me. But here is where the story shifts. Because life, in its relentless way, forced me to redefine everything I thought I knew. At 34, I stand as a woman who rebuilt herself from ashes. I became an architect, designing structures of steel and glass that could not be easily broken, perhaps because I needed my life to mirror that strength. I built a career, a reputation, and finally a fortune that I never expected. And yet the true wealth came not from blueprints or contracts, but from the love of a man who chose me when everyone else decided I was disposable. James Wilson. He was not my blood. But he was in every sense of the word my father. When James died, the world seemed to collapse again. The man who had taught me the meaning of home, who had shown me that love could be steady and unconditional, was gone. Yet even in death, his final act was to protect me. He left me everything he had built. $27 million. Yes. But more importantly, the foundation of security that no one could take from me. His signature on that will was more than legal ink. It was the seal of a promise that I mattered. But fate is cruelly poetic, because just as one father's will lifted me, another father's shadow, returned. Henry Chang, the man who had called me useless and a burden, the man who once calculated that raising me was an investment with no return, knocked on my door. His face had aged, his hair thinned, but his eyes carried the same entitlement. He dared to call me daughter, and I realized this story was not finished. That is why I am telling you this today, not for pity, not for praise, but because I know there are so many of you who carry wounds that come not from strangers, but from the very people meant to protect you. Betrayal by family leaves a different kind of scar. It whispers lies into your soul that you are unworthy, unlovable, expendable. I want you to hear my truth. Those lies can be broken. You can build a life so strong that no rejection can demolish it. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And if my story already resonates even a little, hit that subscribe button. Because this channel is not just about me, it is about us. About creating a community where stories of resilience are not secrets whispered in the dark, but torches that light the way for others. I want you to stay with me because the story is about to dive deeper, into the birthdays where I sat invisible, into the day my father announced the unborn baby boy was worth more than my entire existence, into the morning when I realized they were going to trade me away like property, and into the moment when I discovered that being abandoned was the cruelest gift life could ever hand me. So do not look away. The heart of this story is still ahead, and the lesson is bigger than me. It is about what happens when we decide that family is not determined by blood, but by the ones who show up and never leave. I grew up in a 2-story house in Portland, Oregon. From the outside, it looked perfect, fresh paint-trimmed lawns, weekend barbecues, and neighbors who waved when they passed. To the world, we were the portrait of a middle-class American family. Inside, however, the truth was far more complicated. My father, Henry Chang, ruled the household like a strict accountant balancing a ledger. He believed in profit and loss, even when it came to his children. My mother, Diane, was quiet, dutiful, and never questioned him. And then there were my brothers. Eric, the eldest, was 10 years older than me, already in high school by the time I was learning to spell my name. Jason, 6 years older, loved teasing me the way big brothers often do. They were both golden in my father's eyes. Every good grade, every trophy, every step toward becoming men was met with cheers, high fives, and celebratory dinners. I was part of those scenes, but never the center. I was the shadow on the edge of the photograph. At first, I did not understand. As a little girl, I thought love was natural, automatic, guaranteed. I remember sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, clutching a perfect report card, waiting for my father's face to light up. He glanced at it, gave me a nod, and returned to asking Jason about baseball practice. That nod was supposed to mean, I am proud of you. But when you have watched your brothers lifted into the air, hugged and rewarded for the same thing, a nod feels like a dismissal. I tried harder. I ran faster with the neighborhood boys, climbed higher trees, and asked for toy trucks instead of dolls. I told myself if I became enough like a son, my father would see me differently. My mother noticed my efforts, and in her way, tried to compensate. She would kneel beside me in the kitchen, teaching me how to fold dumplings or sweep the floor just right. These skills will make you valuable one day, she said. I did not realize then that she was preparing me not for my father's approval, but for a future in someone else's home. One memory burns brightest, my 6th birthday. My brothers had been celebrated with parties full of balloons, friends, and gifts stacked high. For me, there was a small cake, a few presents from my mother, and a $20 bill slipped into a card my father signed. He was not even there to watch me blow out the candles. That night, I overheard him on the phone telling a relative, no point in making a big deal for a girl. I went to bed holding that $20 bill, crying quietly so no one would hear. It was the first time I felt the weight of being born female in his eyes. As I grew older, his disappointment became more obvious, more brutal. One evening, I overheard him speaking to his brother. What can I do with a useless daughter? The boys will carry the family name. Anna will just marry off and cost us money. She is an investment with no return. I was only 7, small enough to hide behind the hallway wall, but old enough to understand every word. Useless, burden, waste. Words that carved themselves into my heart. The imbalance at home was not just about affection, it was cultural, generational, and deeply ingrained. My father came from a traditional mindset where daughters were temporary guests, sons were legacies. I became a living reminder of his disappointment, no matter how hard I tried to prove him wrong. My grades soared. My teachers praised me. Yet at the dinner table, the conversation always circled back to Eric's future in college, or Jason's sports. Looking back, I can see how my desperation shaped me. I learned to work twice as hard, speak half as much, and swallow the ache of invisibility. I thought if I just endured long enough, things would change. But change never came. Instead, the imbalance grew stronger. And I was about to learn that in my family, being a girl meant not just being overlooked, it meant being expendable. By the time I turned 6, the contrast between me and my brothers had become impossible to ignore. Children notice these things more sharply than adults think. A smile withheld is as loud as a door slammed shut. Every celebration in our home became proof that I was not enough. Eric received a gleaming new bike when he aced his finals. Jason got a video game console with flashing lights and endless excitement. I, on the other hand, unwrapped a pair of socks and a notebook. My mother gave me those gifts with trembling hands, her eyes apologizing for what her voice never dared to say. And my father, he left a card with $20 inside his signature, as cold as his absence. That birthday scarred me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the small cake. The candles flickered, their glow mocking the emptiness in the room. My father was at work, though I suspected the truth, he simply did not think my birthday was worth showing up for. Later that night, hidden in the hallway, I heard him on the phone. His words carved into me like a blade. Yes, we had something small for Anna, nothing fancy. No point in wasting money on a girl. I pressed the $20 bill to my chest, as if holding it tighter would give it value beyond what he intended. That paper became a mirror of my worth in his eyes, flat, fragile, disposable. I fell asleep with tears soaking my pillow, the words "not worth it" echoing like a curse. As I grew older, I fought against the curse with everything I had. I chased perfect report cards, winning ribbons at science fairs, building projects that made my teachers beam with pride. Each time I carried those triumphs home, hoping they would buy me the same joy my father reserved for Eric and Jason. Instead, I received distracted nods, pats on the head, and eyes that shifted back to the real heirs of his legacy. The cruelest part was the way my mother tried to fill the gap. She spent hours teaching me to cook, sew, and clean, whispering, "These skills will make you special one day. A good wife, a good mother." She was trying to give me tools for survival in a world that valued me only for what I could give, never for who I was. But I did not want to be useful in someone else's kitchen. I wanted to be seen by my father as worthy in my own right. I remember one Christmas when Jason received a brand new guitar, Eric unwrapped expensive sports gear, and I found a set of kitchen utensils under the tree. At 9 years old, I was being trained not for dreams, but for service. My father's smile that morning was wide, proud, and none of it was for me. The language of neglect is subtle, but it builds over time. The empty seat at my birthday, the thin applause when I won an award, the absence of photographs where I was the focus. Each small act stacked on top of the last until the weight of it crushed the little girl inside me who only wanted to be loved. One evening, I overheard the words that would change me forever. My father was on the phone with his brother, his voice steady and dismissive. "What can I do with a useless daughter? She will just marry and cost us money. The boys will carry the name. Anna is nothing but an expense with no return." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Those words were not thrown in anger. They were delivered in calm certainty, like a verdict already sealed. That was the night I understood my father did not simply fail to see me, he had already decided I was a mistake. The imbalance was no longer hidden. It was spoken aloud, branded into my memory. From that day forward, every smile for my brothers became another nail in the coffin of my childhood innocence. And though I still tried to win him over deep down, I knew the truth in my father's world. I would never be enough. The turning point came when I was 7.5. My mother called us all into the living room one Sunday afternoon, her voice trembling with a strange kind of excitement. "I have news," she said, pressing one hand against her stomach. "I am pregnant." I watched my father's face light up in a way I had never seen before. His usual sternness melted into joy, almost boyish in its intensity. He wrapped his arms around my mother and declared, "This time it will be a son. I can feel it." His words were final, as if the possibility of a daughter did not exist. The house transformed overnight. The small office beside their bedroom was cleared out and painted blue. Baby clothes in tiny sports jerseys hung from hangers. Miniature baseball gloves and toy cars filled the shelves. Every dinner conversation revolved around the unborn baby boy. Relatives came over, patting my mother's growing belly, saying things like, "The Chang family needs another strong boy." No one noticed me shrinking in the corner. No one asked how I felt about this new arrival. I tried to join in the excitement. "I can help take care of the baby," I offered one evening. My father nodded, not unkindly, but his words cut. Girls are good at looking after babies. That was it, the only role he saw for me. Not achievements, not a legacy, just a caretaker for the sons who mattered. When Daniel was born, my father's joy exploded. He handed out cigars at the hospital, called everyone he knew, and took hundreds of photographs. He called Daniel his perfect son, though he already had 2 others. I, his daughter, was invisible. At 8 years old, I tried desperately to stay relevant. I fetched diapers, helped prepare bottles, folded laundry. I brought home straight A report cards that were barely glanced at before the conversation shifted back to Daniel's new smile or his ability to roll over. Every day I disappeared a little more. At dinner, no one asked about my schoolwork. On weekends, all attention centered on Daniel's milestones. Even my mother, who once tried to compensate, became consumed by the baby. I was left clinging to scraps of attention, hoping that if I was helpful enough, quiet enough, maybe they would still see me. But beneath the surface, something more sinister was growing. I overheard late-night conversations about money, about tightening the belt. My father whispered about how raising 3 children was too costly. Eric's college, Jason's sports, Daniel's needs all were priorities. "Something has to give," he said one night. And then came the words that shattered me. "Anna is young. She could adjust to a new family. There are agencies that place children in homes with better opportunities. We cannot waste resources when Daniel is our future." I was frozen in the hallway, clutching my glass of water, listening as my own fate was decided, like I was an unwanted piece of furniture. My mother protested faintly. "She is our daughter." But my father silenced her with the same argument he had always used. "She is just a girl." That was when I knew. I was not simply overlooked. I was expendable. Looking back, I see how inevitable it was. My father's belief in sons as heirs had been building toward this moment all along. But for a child, hearing those words was unbearable. I promised myself I would work harder, take up less space, cost less money. I tried to erase my own existence in hopes they would let me stay, but the decision had already been made. And that decision would alter everything. Before I take you further into what happened next, let me pause and ask you, have you ever felt like you were slowly erased inside your own family? That no matter how hard you tried, nothing was ever enough? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know I am not alone in this. Because what came next was the cruelest lesson of my life. I would learn that love in my family was not unconditional. It was conditional on being born a boy. Autumn came with crisp mornings and leaves crunching under my shoes. But inside our home, the air was heavy with tension. By then, I had just turned 8. Eric was off to college. Jason spent most of his time at friends' houses, and Daniel, the new golden child, was the son everyone orbited. I had become invisible. One Saturday morning, my parents called me into the living room. The atmosphere was strangely formal, like a meeting rather than a family conversation. My father cleared his throat, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "Anna, your mother and I have made a difficult decision," he said. "We believe it is best for everyone, especially you." I already knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. He spoke of financial struggles, of opportunities I deserved, but they could not provide. My mother sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes wet but silent. I pleaded, my voice trembling. "I do not need much. I can share a room with Daniel. I can wear Jason's old clothes. I can help more around the house." My father's response was final. "This is not about what you need. This is about what is best for you." The unspoken truth filled the silence. They wanted me gone, because I was a girl, because I was taking resources from the son who mattered. That night I was told to pack one suitcase. 8 years of life reduced to a single bag. I walked through my room like a ghost, trying to decide which parts of myself were worth carrying. A stuffed bear from my grandmother, a photo from last Christmas, when I still believed I belonged a few books. Every item felt like a fragment of a disappearing identity. I did not sleep. I memorized the shadows on the ceiling, the scent of my pillow, the creak of the house. I made promises to the dark I would be smarter, quieter, stronger, less needy. If only they would let me stay. But morning came with cruel swiftness. My mother made pancakes my favorite breakfast, as if that sweetness could soften betrayal. My father checked his watch repeatedly, impatient to complete the task. The drive to the agency was silent. I sat in the back seat, clutching my suitcase, watching familiar streets slip away like pages torn from a book. The agency building was sterile walls painted in muted colors, the air sharp with disinfectant. A woman with kind eyes greeted us, leading us to an office where paperwork waited. My father signed the forms quickly, his pen strokes confident, efficient. To him, it was just another transaction. When the time came to say goodbye, he shook the social worker's hand before turning to me. He gave my shoulder an awkward pat. "Be good. Do what you are told." It sounded like advice for summer camp, not abandonment. My mother hugged me briefly, whispering through tears, "I love you. I am sorry." And then they left. They did not look back. I ran to the window, pressing my face against the glass as their car pulled away. My heart begged for them to turn around to show even a flicker of hesitation. But they drove off steadily, disappearing from view. That night, in a sterile group home with a pillow that smelled of industrial detergent, I cried until I had no voice left. 8 years old, abandoned not by strangers, but by the people meant to love me most. And all because I had been born the wrong gender. Something inside me hardened forever that night. I vowed never again to beg for love, never again to let someone else decide my worth. But vows do not erase pain. They only give shape to the wound. This was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of a story I could not yet imagine. The first night in the group home felt like an eternity. The room was cold, the sheets scratchy, and the walls too white to feel alive. I stared at the ceiling, my small suitcase tucked beneath the bed, as if hiding it would keep my memories from being stolen. The other children seemed accustomed to this place. They moved through routines like ghosts who had learned not to expect much. I, however, was still bleeding from the wound of being abandoned only hours earlier. Over the next year, I was passed from one foster placement to another. The first house was overcrowded, 6 other children squeezed into narrow rooms. Meals were quick, chaotic, and there was never enough attention to go around. I felt like a number on a checklist rather than a child. The second placement was with a couple who seemed kind at first, but after 2 months, they announced they wanted a younger child, preferably a toddler, they could mold into their dream. I was sent back, carrying my suitcase like a scarlet letter. The third family looked perfect from the outside, but soon I realized they were more interested in the monthly stipend than in me. Love was not part of their vocabulary. Each rejection chipped away at me. I stopped introducing myself at new schools, stopped making friends, stopped trying to fit in. Why bother when I would be uprooted again before I could plant roots? Books became my only sanctuary. Between pages, I could escape into worlds where children were chosen, cherished, even heroic. At 9 years old, I learned to disappear in plain sight. Miss Garcia, my social worker, noticed. She told me I was building walls too high. "Not everyone will leave you," she said gently during one of our monthly check-ins. I nodded, but inside I laughed bitterly. Everyone had left me. My parents, my foster families, even the system itself seemed designed to move me like a pawn. Trust felt like a luxury I could not afford. Then came the Robertsons. They were a religious couple who saw fostering as a duty, not a calling. Rules dominated that house: when to eat, when to speak, how to sit at the table. I was never good enough. One day a vase broke while I was at school, but Mrs. Robertson blamed me without hesitation. My punishment was cruel: no dinner and confinement to my room for an entire weekend. Hunger gnawed at me, but worse was the reminder that I was always an easy target. Miss Garcia made a surprise visit that Saturday. She found me in tears, hungry and afraid. Within a week, I was removed from that house and placed back in the group home. By then, I was convinced I would never belong anywhere. But here's the truth: life often hides in the darkest corners. Sometimes you have to be completely broken before the right pieces fall into place. Because what happened next would change everything. Miss Garcia sat across from me in the visitation room, her voice careful, hopeful. "I have someone in mind," she said. "He is different. A single foster parent, which is unusual. But his record is excellent, and every child who has lived with him speaks highly of him. His name is James Wilson." I shrugged, too numb to believe, whatever I muttered, pulling at a loose thread on my jeans. But her eyes told me she believed this man was not like the others. I did not know then that I was about to meet the person who would rewrite the definition of family for me. I did not know he would sit outside my door through the night when I had nightmares. I did not know he would give me his name, his home, and his unconditional love. But that meeting was coming, and when it did, my life would never be the same. And here's my promise to you: stay with me. Because what I am about to share next is the moment my story shifts from despair to hope. Do not miss it. This is where the cracks in my broken heart finally met the light. The day I met James Wilson began like so many others, with Miss Garcia driving me to yet another placement. I sat in the back seat, arms crossed, my suitcase at my side. The knot in my stomach had become familiar. I knew the drill. Smile, politely unpack, quietly, never hope for more than a few weeks before being sent back. But as the car turned down a long driveway lined with maple trees, I noticed something different. At the end stood a beautiful craftsman-style home with wide porches and windows that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. It looked less like an institution and more like a place someone could belong. James greeted us at the door. He was tall, lean, with silver hair and kind blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, not the stiff suits I was used to from foster parents who wanted to impress the system. He knelt down to my level, his knees probably protesting, and said, "You must be Anna. I have been looking forward to meeting you." His voice was steady, warm, as though he had known me all along. I gave a small nod, suspicious, my heart armored. But then he added, "Miss Garcia tells me you love to read. I have a library in need of a good reader." That caught me off guard. No one had ever noticed my love for books, much less offered to share their own. James showed me around the house, pointing out the vegetable garden, the bird feeders he had built, and finally the library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned with books of every kind, classic science, art fiction. My fingers itched to touch the spines, but I held back. Then he led me to what would be my room if I stayed. It was large and bright, with a window seat overlooking the garden, a desk for schoolwork, and empty shelves waiting to be filled. "I have not decorated much," James explained. "I thought if you decided to stay, you might want to choose the colors yourself. After all, this would be your space." I froze. My space. The words were foreign to me. In every other home, I had been a temporary guest. Rooms were already painted, already claimed, never mine to change. The idea that someone would let me decide, let me matter, was overwhelming. Still, I kept my guard. When I officially moved in 2 weeks later, I unpacked quietly, convinced this was just another stop before rejection. James did not push. He asked about my day over dinner, but never pried. He noticed which books I chose and left similar ones on my desk, not demanding I read them, just offering. He invited me to help in the garden, but never forced. He gave me space, something no one else had done. 6 weeks and the first crack appeared in my wall. I woke screaming from a nightmare dreams where I watched my parents' car drive away over and over. My chest heaved, my face wet with tears. I expected annoyance, maybe punishment. Instead, I heard a gentle knock. "Anna, may I come in?" James asked softly. I hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." He entered with a mug of hot chocolate. "Bad dream?" he asked, handing it to me. I nodded, too ashamed to speak. He sat on the edge of my bed and, instead of demanding details, shared a piece of himself. "I used to have them too after my wife died. Sometimes our minds process pain in sleep." He stayed until I finished the drink, then said, "Would it help if I stayed nearby?" I nodded again, expecting him to pull up a chair. But in the morning, I discovered he had spent the entire night sitting outside my door, just so I would feel safe. That was the night my walls began to crumble. For the first time since I was 8, I wondered if someone could truly choose me, not for money, not for duty, but simply for love. The months that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. James never tried to replace what I had lost. He simply gave me what I had never truly had: consistency. He never missed a school event. He cheered when I aced a test, hung my drawings on the refrigerator, and asked questions about my day as though the answers mattered. Slowly, the fear of being discarded loosened its grip. One spring afternoon, James invited me on what he called an adventure. We drove around Portland, visiting buildings he admired. He pointed out details in the architecture, the way light poured through cathedral windows, the symmetry of bridges, the strength hidden in steel beams. Structures, he said, are not just walls. They are promises of safety. They are meant to shelter, to last. Something clicked inside me. Architecture was not only about buildings, it was about creating spaces where people could feel safe. Spaces like the one James had given me. That day planted a seed I would one day grow into a career. But at 9 years old, I only knew one thing: I wanted to build things that lasted, just like the life James was helping me rebuild. My trust grew in increments. I began leaving my books on his desk as a quiet exchange, and he would leave new ones in return. I stopped flinching when he moved too quickly near me. I began to laugh, real laughter, the kind I thought I had lost forever. And then came my 10th birthday. I woke expecting nothing. Birthdays had always been small reminders of what I lacked, but James had other plans. He took me to my favorite diner for pancakes, then drove to the courthouse. Confused, I followed him into a room where a judge greeted us. James knelt beside me and said, "I would like to adopt you, Anna, if that is something you would want." For a moment, I could not breathe. Adoption meant permanence. It meant no more suitcases, no more goodbyes, no more waiting to be sent back. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Yes." 3 months later, the papers were finalized. I became Anna Wilson, not just in name, but in truth. James took me shopping for paint and furnishings for my room. We spent a weekend turning it into my space, my forever space. He even built me a custom bookshelf under the window seat, perfect for my growing collection. Every nail he hammered felt like a promise: "You belong here." It was not just a new home, it was a new beginning. For the first time, I felt safe enough to dream, safe enough to believe I was not a burden, but a daughter. James had chosen me, and that choice healed wounds my parents' rejection had carved into my heart. Looking back now, I see how those years became the foundation of my resilience. Without James, I might have stayed broken. With him, I learned that one person's steady love can rewrite an entire story. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had someone step into your life and show you what real family feels like? A teacher, a mentor, a friend who treated you like blood never did? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear the people who became your chosen family. Because those moments matter. They change us. And for me, they became the blueprint of everything I would build. Adoption gave me more than a new last name. It gave me freedom to imagine a future. For the first time, my days were not filled with dread of being uprooted. Instead, they were filled with books, late-night talks with James, and a sense of stability I had never known. Stability became the soil where my dreams could finally take root. James noticed my fascination with buildings and design almost immediately. I spent hours sketching houses and stacking blocks into elaborate structures. He nurtured that interest with patience and pride. For my 11th birthday, he gave me a set of building blocks meant for budding engineers. They were more than toys. They were lessons in balance, in design, in imagination. He sat beside me as I built towers and bridges, listening as I explained how each piece fit together. "You have an eye for this," he said. "One day you could design places where people feel safe, just like you needed once." Those words stayed with me. They were the opposite of what my biological father had once said. Henry had called me useless. James told me I was capable. Henry had seen me as a burden. James saw me as a foundation. Slowly, I began to believe him. School transformed from an escape into a launching pad. I stopped hiding in the back row and started raising my hand. Teachers noticed my curiosity, my eagerness to learn. With James cheering me on at every parent-teacher conference, I felt like my efforts mattered. For the first time, I wanted to excel, not just to prove someone wrong, but to make someone proud. It was during middle school that I met Zoe, the friend who would become my sister in everything but blood. She was loud, fearless, and full of life, so different from me. She plopped down at my table in the library one afternoon and declared, "You always read the best books. We should talk about them." That boldness startled me, but it also cracked another layer of my shell. With Zoe, I learned what friendship could feel like: safe, steady fun. James welcomed her into our home with the same warmth he gave me. When she stayed for dinner, he made extra dessert. When she slept over, he left the nightlight on in the hallway. "Your family too," he told her once, and I saw the way her face lit up. He had that effect on people, making them feel chosen. By high school, my interest in architecture had solidified into passion. James fanned the flames with books on design trips to see famous buildings and endless encouragement. For my 16th birthday, he gave me professional drafting tools and a drawing table. "Your future is in your hands," he told me, "and I will make sure nothing stands in your way." I began researching universities, daring to dream about places I never thought possible. Cornell's architecture program became my goal, though it felt like a star too far to reach. When I confessed my worry about money, James smiled. "I have been saving for your education since the day you moved in. You just focus on getting accepted. I will handle the rest." That moment taught me something profound. Real love prepares you, invests in you, believes in you. I was no longer trying to erase myself to be kept. I was building myself to be seen. The little girl who once clutched a $20 bill as proof of her worth was gone. In her place stood a young woman learning that her worth was infinite and that her dreams were possible. By the time I was in my early 30s, my life looked like something I once thought belonged only in dreams. I had graduated from Cornell's architecture program with honors. I had landed a job at a prestigious firm in Portland. My designs were being recognized for their creativity and human-centered vision. I had even purchased a small fixer-upper home, which James and I spent countless weekends renovating together. Each nail we hammered felt like a celebration of how far we had come. James never missed a milestone. He attended every gallery opening, featuring my projects, clipped newspaper articles about my work, and introduced me proudly as my daughter, the architect. For a girl who once overheard her father call her useless, these moments healed wounds that had lived in me for decades. With James beside me, I finally felt whole. But time, relentless and merciless, began to show its hand. At first it was subtle, a tremor in James's fingers as he held his coffee, a pause as he searched for the right word, clothes that hung more loosely on his frame. When I voiced concern, he brushed it off with a chuckle. "I am 82, Anna. Getting old is not a disease." But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening during our weekly dinner, he barely touched his food. His fork trembled in his hand. I could no longer ignore it. "Dad," I said, finally comfortable calling him, "that we need to talk about your health." He sighed a sound heavy with resignation. He reached across the table and gripped my hand. "I had hoped to spare you this a little longer, but you have always been too perceptive. Anna, I have pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The room tilted. My chest tightened as tears blurred my vision. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? We can find treatment, specialist trials. Anything." He shook his head gently. "I already consulted the best. It was too advanced when they found it. The treatments would only add pain and steal the time I have left." I wanted to argue, to scream at the unfairness, but his eyes, steady, full of love, stopped me. "I need you to help me die with the same dignity I've tried to live with," he said softly. "And then I need you to live your life fully, knowing you gave me more joy than I ever thought possible." The next 6 months became both the hardest and most beautiful of my life. I took leave from work to care for him. We watched old films, flipped through photo albums, and had long conversations about life, love, and the mysteries beyond. He told me stories of his youth, of the wife he had lost, and of the moment he first saw me, frightened, withdrawn, yet holding my suitcase with quiet courage. "You were the gift I never expected," he said. "You made me a father." On a quiet spring morning, sunlight streaming through the window, I held his hand as his breathing slowed. I whispered stories from our life, assuring him I would be okay. With one final breath, James Wilson slipped away, leaving behind not just silence, but a legacy etched into every fiber of who I was. The grief was crushing, but within it was gratitude. I had been loved unconditionally. I had been chosen. And even in death, James had one final gift to give. 3 weeks later, I sat in the office of Richard Thornton James's lawyer. Papers spread across the desk, his voice calm, as he explained James Wilson's estate is valued at approximately $27 million. According to his will, you are the sole heir. I sat in stunned silence. The man who had once patched the cracks in my broken heart had left me everything he built. But it was not the money that broke me into tears, it was the meaning. His final act was proof of what he had always shown me, that I was worthy, valuable, and loved. I thought the story would end there with grief, love, and inheritance. But I was wrong, because as the ink dried on the will, a shadow from my past was already moving closer. A knock was coming, one that would test everything James had given me. Grief is strange. It crashes over you in waves, sometimes knocking you down, sometimes letting you breathe just long enough to remember what you've lost. In the weeks after James's funeral, I walked through my home like a shadow. His chair sat empty, his voice gone, but his presence lingered in every corner. I was clinging to that presence when the world decided to test me again. It began with phone calls. A voice on the other end would ask for me by name, then hang up. At first, I dismissed them as mistakes, but the pattern grew: calls at odd hours, silence, then a click. My lawyer Richard warned me, "It may be connected to the inheritance. Be cautious." I changed my number, tightened security, and tried to push forward. But 3 months after James's death, the past appeared on my doorstep, literally. The doorbell rang one afternoon while I was sketching designs at my drafting table. Through the security camera, I saw a man in his 60s. His face was weathered, his suit well-worn, though it tried to appear expensive. Something about him tugged at my memory like a nightmare I'd buried, but never escaped. When he spoke, the world tilted. "Anna Chang," he said. "It's your father, Henry." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Henry Chang, the man who had signed away his daughter like an unwanted contract. The man who had told relatives there was no point in celebrating a girl's birthday. The man whose car drove away from the agency without a backward glance stood at my door, calling himself father. Every instinct screamed to lock the door and pretend I wasn't home. But years of therapy, years of James's love had built a strength I didn't have as a child. I opened the door, but blocked his entry. "My name is Anna Wilson," I said coldly. "What do you want?" His face shifted, surprise flickering at my hostility. "I've been searching for you for years," he claimed, voice thick with rehearsed sincerity. "When I saw the news of your inheritance, I knew it was finally my chance to find you. Your mother, she passed away 10 years ago. Her last wish was for me to make amends." His eyes glistened with tears that might have fooled me once. Not now. I studied him. The frayed cuffs, the replica, watched the hunger in his gaze. My heart knew the truth before my mind caught up. He wasn't here for love. He was here for money. "I need time," I said, finally taking his card without looking. "This is not a conversation I'm prepared to have today." He nodded quickly, too eager. Of course, of course. Call me when you're ready. Please, call me Dad." The word struck like poison. Dad belonged to James, always would. That night I called Zoe. My voice trembled as I told her everything. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" she asked gently. I stared out the window at the Portland skyline, feeling the past press in. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I intend to find out." The next morning I hired a private investigator. A week later, the report confirmed what my instincts already knew: Henry was in ruins. His banking career had ended in disgrace, marred by ethical violations. He had drifted from job to job, his gambling debts piling higher each year. His home had been foreclosed on. He lived in a small rental, not the Marriott he claimed. And in 24 years, he had never once searched for me. Not until news of my $27 million inheritance broke. The investigator also found my brothers. Eric was a surgeon in Boston with 3 children. Jason was a high school teacher in Seattle with a family of his own. Both had severed ties with Henry years ago. Even Daniel, the son who replaced me, barely spoke to him anymore. Henry had managed to lose everyone. Armed with the truth, I felt a storm gathering inside me. My biological father was back, and he wasn't here for reconciliation. He was here to drain what James had left me. Stay with me, because what happened next was not just a reunion, it was a collision. The little girl who once begged to be kept would finally face the man who threw her away. And I promise you the confrontation will leave you stunned. I agreed to meet Henry in public, where walls and witnesses could protect me from the shadows of my past. We chose a restaurant downtown, a place with glass walls that let in the bright Portland sun. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance, my heart beating with a rhythm that felt both furious and fragile. He came in late, dressed in a suit that was trying too hard, his smile too eager. "Anna," he said, as though the name had belonged to him all along. "You've grown into such a beautiful, successful woman. I always knew you would." I held his gaze, my voice calm but sharp. "Did you? Because the last thing I remember is you saying I was useless. That raising me was a waste, that I was an investment with no return." His smile faltered. He shifted in his seat, scrambling for the story he had rehearsed. "We were struggling financially. We thought another family could give you better opportunities." "Better opportunities," I cut in. "Then why did you never check on me? Not once. Not a letter, not a phone call. 24 years of silence, and you show up only after my inheritance made headlines." His mask slipped. Anger sparked in his eyes. "We are family. Blood matters. That fortune you inherited, it should stay in the family." Something inside me snapped, but not in weakness, in strength. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. James Wilson was my family. He gave me his name, his love, his life. He sat outside my door all night when I had nightmares. He believed in me when you called me worthless. He was more of a father in 1 week than you were in 8 years. Henry's jaw tightened. He was rich. Anyone can play savior with millions. "No," I said, my voice rising. "He chose me. He valued me. And I will never let you reduce that to money." The mask of sincerity fell away completely. His tone turned sharp, his face hard. "You owe me. I gave you life. Without me, you would be nothing." I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. My heart pounded, but my voice was strong. "You are right about one thing. Without you, I would not be who I am. But not because of your love, because of your rejection. You threw me away, and that led me to James. For that unintended gift, I thank you. But that is all you will ever get from me." Gasps echoed as nearby diners turned their heads. Henry's face twisted with rage. "You're nothing but an ungrateful girl who got lucky," he shouted, his voice cracking through the restaurant like glass shattering. I didn't look back. I walked out each step heavier with grief, yet lighter with release. For the first time, I had faced him, not as the little girl begging to stay, but as a woman who finally knew her worth. That night I sat with Zoe, telling her everything. My voice shook, but my resolve was solid. "He is desperate," I admitted. "And desperate men can do worse than beg." She squeezed my hand. "Then you need to be ready." And she was right, because Henry was not finished. The man who once abandoned me as a child was about to show how far he would go to claim what was never his. I thought walking out of that restaurant would be the end. I thought facing Henry, speaking the truth out loud, would finally close the wound he had left. But people like him rarely let go. Desperation has claws. At first it was phone calls again, this time late at night from blocked numbers. Sometimes silence, sometimes his voice slurred and angry. "You can't ignore me forever, Anna. I'm your father." Then came the emails from anonymous accounts claiming he was dying, claiming I owed him a final conversation. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox written in a shaky hand. "Family forgives. Family shares." I tried to brush it off, but unease grew inside me. I tightened security at home-hired guards for my office and asked my assistant to screen every call. Still, it wasn't enough. The final straw came one evening in the parking garage at work. I had stayed late sketching designs for a new project when I felt movement behind me. Out of the shadows, Henry appeared. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild. "You can't keep shutting me out," he hissed. "I am your father. You owe me everything." My hand tightened around my phone, ready to call security. "No," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "You forfeited that title 24 years ago. James Wilson was my father. You're just a man who made the worst decision of his life and now wants to profit from mine." His face twisted with rage. "That old man brainwashed you. He stole you from your real family. We would have come back if we could afford it." I stepped closer, letting my anger harden into steel. "Stop lying. I know the truth. You never once looked for me, not once. My investigator found my brothers, both of them cut ties with you. Even Daniel barely speaks to you. You didn't lose me because you couldn't afford me. You lost me because you never valued me." Security arrived, pulling him back as his shouts echoed in the concrete space. "This isn't over," he screamed. "I will get what I deserve." That night I sat in my living room shaking. For years I had built a life out of strength, but now I understood Henry would never stop. Unless I took control of the narrative. Unless I turned this darkness into light. So I made a decision. The next morning I called Richard, my lawyer. "I want to establish a foundation," I told him, "in James's name. For children like me, kids who were abandoned, kids who aged out of foster care without ever being adopted. Housing assistance, scholarships, mentorship programs. And I want to dedicate a significant portion of the inheritance to it. This will be James's true legacy." Richard was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "He would be proud of you, Anna." For the next 6 months, I poured my grief into building the James Wilson Foundation. Every document I signed, every program we outlined felt like another brick in a fortress of purpose. I met young people who had stories like mine left behind, overlooked, struggling to believe they mattered. And I told them what James once told me: "You are valuable exactly as you are." Henry kept trying, letters, demands, through cheap lawyers, whispers of lawsuits. I answered each one with silence or legal warnings. He couldn't touch me anymore, not where it counted. Because the truth was clear now, my worth didn't come from his approval, and my future didn't belong to his greed. Instead, I chose to transform what he meant for harm into something healing. I chose to honor the man who had saved me by becoming that person for others. The confrontation with Henry had shown me something important. Closure doesn't come from someone else's apology. Closure comes when you take the pain they gave you and use it to build something they can never destroy. And in the final part of this story, I'll show you how I cut the last tie to Henry forever, and how I finally turned my scar into a legacy. Don't look away. This ending matters. The meeting was set in Richard's conference room, a space built to command authority. I walked in with my head high, my pulse steady. Across the polished oak table sat Henry looking smug, his lawyer beside him with a worn briefcase that seemed ready to collapse. He leaned back in his chair, as if victory were already his. "I'm glad you finally came to your senses," Henry said, smirking. "Family courts recognize the rights of biological parents. You can't cut me out. Blood is blood." I held his gaze. "This isn't about blood, it's about choices. You chose to discard me 24 years ago. James Wilson chose to love me. That's the only choice that matters." Richard slid documents across the table. "Mr. Chang, the adoption was legal, final, and never contested. Any claim you think you have is baseless. Pursuing this further will only open you to countersuits for harassment." Henry's face reddened. "She owes me, I gave her life. Without me, she'd have nothing." I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost cold. "No. Without you, I had nothing. Until James. He gave me everything: a name, a home, a future. You contributed DNA. He contributed love. And love is what builds family." The mask slipped and Henry slammed his hand on the table. Ungrateful little. His lawyer raised a hand quickly, whispering for him to stop. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room had seen the truth. I stood gathering my papers. "I will make one offer. If you seek counseling for your gambling addiction, I'll cover the costs. But you will never see $1 of James's legacy. Not 1 cent. His eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over." I met his fury with calm finality. "It is for me. Any further contact, and I'll file a restraining order. This is the last time we speak." I turned to Richard. "Let's go." Walking out of that conference room, I felt something break loose inside me. It wasn't fear or anger, it was release. The chains of his rejection no longer bound me. He had no claim on me, not legally, not emotionally, not spiritually. I was free. 6 months later, the James Wilson Foundation opened its first housing project for young adults aging out of foster care. 20 apartments, a community center, mentorship programs. I cut the ribbon with tears in my eyes, telling the crowd, family is not defined by blood. It's defined by love, by choice, by showing up every single day. In that moment, I felt James beside me, his pride, his steady hand, his voice reminding me, "You are valuable, you are worthy, you belong." Henry faded from my life after that. I later heard whispers he'd gone to Las Vegas chasing luck at the tables. But by then, he was no longer part of my story. My story belonged to the girl who had once been abandoned, and the woman who had turned that abandonment into purpose. As I looked at the building we had created, safe, sturdy, filled with light, I knew I had honored James's legacy. I had also honored myself. The scar was still there, but it had become a map leading me toward resilience, toward freedom. And before I close this chapter, let me ask you, how do you define family? Is it blood, or is it the people who show up and choose you? Share your story in the comments. I promise your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more journeys like mine, stories of resilience, betrayal, and transformation, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay with me. The next story will take you even deeper into what it means to fight for your worth. Because scars don't define us. What we build from them does. After the noise of courtrooms, confrontations, and headlines, my life finally found a rhythm of peace. Evenings became quiet again, just me, my work, and the gentle hum of possibility. I often sat in James's old chair, now worn soft, staring at the bookshelf he built for me years ago. On its shelves rested not only the books that had carried me through childhood, but also framed photos from the ribbon cutting of the foundation. Smiling faces of young adults stepping into homes they could finally call their own. Grief still lived with me, but it had softened. It no longer screamed, it whispered. Some days I felt the ache of what was taken from me. Other days I felt the warmth of what was given in its place. Both truths shaped me, but only one defined me: love chosen freely. I began to understand that scars do not vanish, nor should they. They remind us where we've been, but they don't have to dictate where we go. James's legacy was never about the fortune he left me. It was about the belief he planted in me that worth is not something handed down by blood, but something inherent waiting to be seen. Now, every time I walk into the Foundation's community center, I see echoes of my younger self in the children who arrive with fear in their eyes. I kneel down, meet their gaze, and tell them the words I once longed to hear: you are valuable. You are not disposable. You belong. And when I whisper those words, I feel James's presence steady and sure. Together we turned something broken into something beautiful. Together we proved that family is not about who abandons you, but who chooses you, stays with you, and builds with you. That is the legacy I will carry forward for myself and for everyone who still waits to be chosen.